Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a close look at a piece of legislation, H.R. 22.
That's right. It's also known as the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or, the SAVE Act for short.
Exactly, the SAVE Act. We've got the actual text of the bill here.
Yep, that's our source.
And our mission today is really to unpack what this bill would actually change about registering to vote in federal elections.
Specifically, what kind of documentation, what proof would you need?
Right. We'll break down the key changes, look at the acceptable documents, and, touch on the processes involved, trying to keep it clear.
Definitely. It's proposing some, pretty significant changes to the National Voter Registration Act of 1993.
So the big question is, if this passes, what new steps are involved? What papers do you need?
That's the core of it.
Okay, let's jump in. First off, the name. You mentioned it. Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or SAVE Act.
Correct. Those are the official short titles used in the bill itself. So if you hear either it's this H.R. 22.
Got it. And the main thing, the absolute centerpiece, seems to be this requirement for proof of citizenship, right?
Precisely. Documentary proof of United States citizenship. That's the key phrase.
And this isn't just for one way of registering.
No, it explicitly says it amends the National Voter Registration Act to require this proof for registering for federal office elections.
Federal elections. Important distinction.
Yes, and it applies crucially under any method of voter registration in a state.
Any method. So like at the DMV, by mail.
All of them. In person, mail, the voter process at the DMV, other agencies. If you're registering for federal elections, the bill says you'd need this proof.
Okay, so that's a fundamental shift. What exactly counts as documentary proof then? Is it just anything?
Oh, no, it's quite specific. The bill lays out a pretty detailed list.
Let's go through it. What's at the top?
Leading the list is identification that's consistent with the Real ID Act of 2005.
Ah, Real ID, like the driver's licenses with the star?
Exactly. If that ID also indicates you're a U.S. citizen, that indication is key.
Okay, so Real ID that shows citizenship. What's next?
A valid United States passport. That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, seems standard. Keep going.
Then there's an official U.S. military ID card. But there's a catch.
Oh, what's the condition?
You need the military ID and a U.S. military record of service that explicitly shows you were born in the United States.
So the ID card alone isn't enough in that case?
Not according to this text. It needs that supporting service record showing a U.S. birth.
Interesting detail. Okay, what else?
Then a valid government-issued photo ID. This could be federal, state, or even tribal.
Like a regular driver's license or state ID?
Yes, but again, with a condition. It has to show your place of birth was in the U.S.
Okay. Many IDs don't show birthplace, though.
Exactly. And the bill addresses that. It says you can use a valid government-issued photo ID, federal, state, or tribal that doesn't show a U.S. birthplace.
But there's a but, I assume.
There is, but you have to present it along with another document from a specific list. Ah, okay. So if my driver's license doesn't say I was born in the U.S., I need that license PLUS something else. What's on that something else list?
Right. First, on that secondary list is a certified birth certificate.
Certified. Does it define what that means?
It does, in quite some detail. It needs to be issued by the relevant government authority, state, local, tribal.
Okay.
It has to be filed officially with the Vital Records Office, include your full name, date, and place of birth, at least one parent's full name.
Wow, specific.
It needs the authorized signature, the official seal, and even the date the certificate was filed must be on it.
So, like, the little decorative one from the hospital probably wouldn't cut it?
Very unlikely. It sounds like it needs to be the official government record.
Okay, certified birth certificate. What else is on that secondary list?
An extract from a U.S. hospital record of birth.
Record of birth.
Yes, but crucially, it must have been created at the time of birth, and it has to indicate a U.S. birth. Contemporaneous record.
Got it. Created back then, says born in the U.S. Next. A final adoption decree. But again, it needs to show your name and confirm a U.S. birth.
Makes sense. What about people born abroad to U.S. citizens?
Addressed. A consular report of birth abroad or a certification of report of birth of a U.S. citizen, both issued by the Secretary of State.
Okay, State Department documents for those born overseas. And naturalized citizens.
Yep. A naturalization certificate or a certificate of citizenship, both issued by the Secretary of Homeland Security.
DHS documents.
And it adds a sort of catch-all. Any other proof of U.S. citizenship issued by the federal government under the Immigration and Nationality Act.
So, covering potentially other federal documents. Anything else?
Just one more item listed. An American Indian card issued by DHS, but it specifically needs the classification KIC.
KIC. Okay.
Right.
That is a detailed list.
It certainly aims for specificity.
So how does this impact the actual ways people register? Let's take motor voter registering when you get your license.
Right. The bill makes it clear. That process would now require citizenship verification following the rules of a new section, Section 8.
Section 8J. We'll probably go back to that.
We will. It's pretty central. States would have to build this check into the driver's license application if you're also registering to vote then. The application form itself changes.
Okay. What about the National Mail Voter Registration Form, the federal postcard form?
States would still have to accept and use it, but again, subject to Section 8J.
So the proof requirement applies there too?
Yes, and state officials would need to make sure residents know about this proof requirement. The form itself would be modified.
Modified how?
To show whether or not the documentary proof was provided with the mail-in application.
Ah. So what happens if someone mails the form but doesn't or can't include the proof right then?
Good question. The bill says they aren't fully registered for federal elections unless they subsequently present that proof in person.
In person? To who?
To the relevant election official by whatever the state's registration deadline is.
Or is there another option?
Yes, or they could present the proof at a polling place on Election Day.
Including early voting.
Including early voting, if the state permits it. So there's an in-person verification step needed if proof isn't sent with the form.
And officials have to tell people this?
Yes. The bill requires election officials to notify the applicant about this requirement and provide instructions on how to submit the proof.
Okay. And what about accessibility for people with disabilities?
The bill mentions that. States, working with the Election Assistance Commission, the EAC, need to ensure reasonable accommodations for presenting proof.
That seems important. Okay. What about other places people register, like public assistance offices, voter registration agencies?
Same rules apply.
Yeah.
Those agencies would also be required to collect this documentary proof of citizenship for federal voter registration.
So when you go in for services, they'd handle this too?
Yes, and even before giving you the registration form, they'd have to ask, are you a citizen of the United States?
Really? Ask first?
According to the text. If you say yes, you have to provide proof before getting the form to register for federal elections at that agency.
And the requirement for these agencies to offer registration?
The bill specifies that obligation only applies to U.S. citizens.
Wow, okay. That changes the dynamic at those agencies quite a bit. So, stepping back, how does the bill handle the overall management of voter rolls to ensure only citizens are listed?
The general administration also falls under this new Section 8J. And significantly, it adds a reason for canceling a registration.
Which is?
Registrations could be canceled if there's documentary proof or, interestingly, verified information that the registrant isn't a U.S. citizen, or if the registration just doesn't comply with state law.
Verified information.
Yeah.
Great. Now, this Section 8J keeps coming up. It sounds like the engine driving a lot of this. Can we unpack that section?
Absolutely. It's titled, Ensuring Only United States Citizens Are Registered to Vote in Elections for Federal Office. Pretty direct.
Sounds like it. What's the main rule in 8J?
The absolute baseline is states cannot register someone for federal elections unless they get that documentary proof of citizenship when the person applies.
At the time of application. But what if someone genuinely is a citizen, but just doesn't have, say, their birth certificate handy right then?
The bill anticipates that. It requires states to set up a specific process for this scenario.
Okay, what kind of process?
An applicant who doesn't have the primary documents immediately, but signs an attestation, basically, swears under penalty of perjury they are a citizen, can submit other evidence of citizenship.
Other evidence. To whom?
To the state or local election officials. Those officials then have to review this other evidence.
And make a judgment call.
Essentially, yes. They determine if citizenship is sufficiently established, if it is.
Then they're registered.
Yes. But the official then has to sign a specific, uniform affidavit. This affidavit would be developed by the EAC.
And what does the affidavit say?
It has to explain the minimum standards used and the specific basis for deciding that this other evidence was sufficient to register the applicant.
So there's a documented alternative path, but it involves official judgment and paperwork.
Correct. And states also need a process if there are discrepancies in the initial documents someone provides.
Like if something looks off or questionable.
Exactly. A way to resolve those issues, potentially by letting the applicant provide more documentation.
Okay. Beyond handling individual applications, what about ongoing list maintenance, keeping the rolls clean?
Section 8J mandates that too. States have to take affirmative steps on an ongoing basis to make sure only citizens are registered.
How? What steps?
They have to establish a program, and quickly, within 30 days of the bill becoming law, specifically to identify non-citizens who might be on the rolls.
Identify them using what?
The bill suggests several sources states should use information from. The Department of Homeland Security is one, potentially using the SAVE program.
SAVE program.
Yes, systematic alien verification for entitlements. It's an existing system DHS uses, or other DHS info.
Oh, well.
Information from the Social Security Administration, maybe via their SSN verification service.
SSD.
Information from state agencies that issue IDs or driver's licenses, if those agencies already confirm citizenship.
So cross-referencing with the DMV databases, potentially.
Could be. And finally, it mentions other databases that can confirm citizenship. It's meant to be a comprehensive check.
It sounds like states would need pretty robust data matching systems. What about getting this data from the federal government? Is that easy?
Well, the bill tries to make it easier. It requires federal agencies to provide relevant citizenship info to state election officials.
Requires them. How quickly?
Within 24 hours of a request. That's a very fast turnaround.
24 hours. For individual checks or batches.
It mentions both specific individuals or batched information requests.
And federal agencies can't charge for this.
Explicitly prohibited. No fees allowed for providing this verification info to the states.
And DHS can use its SAVE system for this.
Yes. The bill specifically allows DHS to use SAVE to respond to these state requests.
It also sounds like it encourages federal agencies to share data among themselves for this purpose.
It directs them to share relevant info with each other to facilitate verifying citizenship for voter registration.
Okay, and if, through this process, it looks like someone is unlawfully registered, what happens then?
The bill directs the Secretary of Homeland Security to investigate.
Investigate what?
Whether to start removal proceedings, deportation against that individual under immigration law.
Wow, okay. So registration status could trigger an immigration investigation.
That's what the text suggests.
And back at the state level, if they confirm someone isn't a citizen.
The bill requires states to remove that person from the federal voter list promptly upon getting that documentation or verified info.
And you mentioned earlier, it clarifies the state's authority to remove non-citizens.
Yes. It amends the existing law, NVRA Section 8.4, to explicitly list documentary proof or verified information that the registrant is not a United States citizen as a valid reason for removal.
So strengthening the legal basis for those removals.
Seems to be the intent.
Let's circle back quickly to that federal mail-in form.
Yeah.
You said it would show if proof wasn't included. Any other changes to the form itself?
Yes, a couple more significant ones.
Like what?
It would need to include an explanation of what's required to present the proof, basically, instructions for the voter.
Makes sense.
And a whole new section gets added for election officials to fill out.
What information goes in that section?
Details about the citizenship document that the voter eventually presents. The type of document, issue date, expiration date, who issued it, any unique ID number. Basically documenting the proof provided.
So a record-keeping section on the form itself.
Exactly. And one more thing. The penalty of perjury warning on the form.
The part about lying being illegal.
Yeah. That gets updated to explicitly include false statements made when attempting to register.
Okay. Clarifying the perjury clause applies to the registration attempt itself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what if officials don't follow these rules? Can anyone sue?
The bill expands what's called the private right of action, meaning individuals or groups could sue if an election official registers someone for a federal election who failed to provide the required proof of citizenship.
So citizens could potentially sue to enforce this proof requirement.
That seems to be the mechanism provided.
Are there penalties for officials or others involved?
Yes, new criminal penalties are introduced.
For whom? And for what?
One is aimed at federal executive branch employees who might provide material assistance to non-citizens trying to register or vote illegally.
Material assistance.
Yeah.
And the other?
Makes it a crime for an election official to actually register someone for a federal election if that person failed to present the required documentary proof.
So potential criminal liability for the official processing the registration without proof.
That's what the penalty targets.
Now, you mentioned earlier this applies to federal elections. Does it apply equally to all states right from the get-go?
Mostly, yes. The amendments are to the National Voter Registration Act, which covers most states. But there's an interesting wrinkle. For a few states, those exempt from some parts of the NVRA under an existing clause, Section 4C, there's a potential delay or opt-in.
How does that work?
Those specific states would only become subject to these new proof requirements, Sections 8 and 8J, if they pass their own identical state laws or regulations.
And they have to do that quickly.
Yes, within 60 days before the first federal election held after the SAVE Act becomes law. If they don't act in that window, it seems these specific requirements might not apply to them initially.
That's a potentially significant difference for those few states. What about the Election Assistance Commission, the EAC? What's their role?
A pretty immediate and crucial one. The bill requires the EAC to issue guidance on how to implement all these new requirements
What,
within 10 days of the act being enacted.
10 days? That's incredibly fast.
It suggests a real push to get this implemented very quickly.
The bill also mentions something about the Paperwork Reduction Act, saying it doesn't apply here.
Right. Usually, creating new federal forms and information collections involves a review process under the Paperwork Reduction Act to minimize burden.
But not here.
No, this bill exempts the development and changes to voter registration materials from that act.
Why would they do that?
Likely to speed things up, to avoid potential delays from that review process when updating forms and procedures for this proof requirement.
Okay. And there's a duty for the Secretary of Homeland Security regarding new citizens.
Yes. When someone becomes a naturalized citizen, DHS is required to promptly notify the chief election official in the state where that new citizen lives.
To help get them registered, presumably.
That seems the likely purpose, yeah. To ensure state officials are aware of newly eligible voters.
Okay, nearly there. The bill ends with a couple of rules of construction. Basically, how not to interpret the law. One is about provisional ballots.
Correct. It clarifies that nothing in this act stops someone from casting a provisional ballot.
Even if they don't have proof on Election Day.
Right. And crucially, it says that provisional ballots should be counted if their citizenship is later verified through that Section 8J process we discussed.
So provisional ballots remain a safety net, provided citizenship can be confirmed later.
That's the idea it conveys. It preserves that mechanism.
And the other rule of construction, about state exemptions.
It just clarifies that this act doesn't affect any other exemptions a state might have from other federal laws. Its impact is confined to the National Voter Registration Act itself.
Got it. So if this bill, H.R. 22, the SEV Act, becomes law, when do these changes kick in?
Immediately. The bill states it takes effect on the date of enactment.
And applies to?
All voter registration applications submitted on or after that date, so no grace period.
Okay, let's try to summarize. The absolute core of the SAVE Act, H.R. 22, is this proposed mandate for documentary proof of U.S. citizenship to register for federal elections.
That's the headline. And we've walked through the pretty exhaustive list of documents that would count as proof.
Right. And we saw how it affects different registration methods, voter mail-in, requiring that proof across the board.
And the new procedures, especially under Section 8J, for handling applications, verifying citizenship, dealing with those without immediate proof.
And the ongoing duty for states to check their roles using federal and state databases.
Plus, the new roles for federal agencies in providing data, potential penalties, and the EAC's guidance role. It's quite comprehensive.
It definitely seems like it would, if enacted, fundamentally change the process of federal voter registration in the U.S.
It would add a significant verification layer, absolutely.
So, listening to this deep dive, you've now got a much clearer sense of what the SEV Act proposes. It's worth thinking about the practical side of this.
Yeah. How would these requirements actually play out for different voters, for election officials trying to manage it all?
What does it mean for election administration in various states with different resources and populations? And it raises that perennial question.
The balance, right, between election security, which this bill aims to bolster by ensuring only citizens register,
And election access, making sure eligible citizens can actually navigate the process and participate.
It's definitely a complex proposal with potentially far-reaching consequences. There are lots of different viewpoints on whether this approach strikes the right balance.
Absolutely, something to continue thinking about and exploring further.